This is breaking news.
Ruth Ellis, the platinum bombshell who was hell-bent on going to the gallows. From where I'm standing, seemingly in a sunlit gallery overlooking a courtroom in the Old Bailey, there's no mistaking the blonde woman in the dock. Dressed in a beautiful black suit, her platinum hair immaculately set, 28-year-old Ruth Ellis looks every bit as glamorous as the journalists reporting her case had led us to expect. Only the white-knuckle grip of her hands on the wooden dock betrays her inner turmoil, as she contemplates the final question put to her by the prosecution. What had she intended to do when she shot her lover, David Blakey, on April 10, 1955? She answers, in a voice clear with candor, "It is obvious that when I shot him, I intended to kill him." A frisson of shock ripples around the court. In just 13 words, Ruth Ellis has ensured her name will soon be entered into Hangman Albert Pierrepoint's accounts book. That's it, everyone. The voice of director Lee Haven Jones brings filming to a close. Like a stage hypnotist bringing a volunteer back to reality, his call returns everyone to the present. We're 70 years too late to anticipate that Ruth Ellis's trial might realistically have a better outcome. But such is the overwhelming power of this adaptation of my book. A Fine Day for a Hanging. The real Ruth Ellis story, now entitled A Cruel Love. That while filming those scenes, I felt eerily optimistic she would somehow avoid fulfilling her fate as the last woman to hang in Britain. There's a flurry of movement as everyone takes advantage of the break to check their phones, use the loo, grab a coffee or something to eat. This vast space, the whole of University College School Hampstead in North London, has been transformed with astonishing accuracy into the Old Bailey. From the wood-paneled walls behind the judge's bench to the careful placement of the clock ticking down the hours. At the center of it all is actress Lucy Boynton, whose portrayal of Ruth is brilliantly nuanced, depicting her more accurately than any previous incarnation. Such is her performance, it's difficult to imagine anyone else ever taking on the role again. The idea of writing about Ruth came to me 15 years ago. I had almost completed my research for one of your own, The Life and Death of Myra Hindley. The female half of the couple known as the Moores murderers had been imprisoned for several years in HMP Holloway, where Ruth spent the last few weeks of her life. I interviewed several former inmates who mentioned Hindley's shuddering fascination with the old execution chamber at Holloway. Ruth was among 5 women hanged there between 1903 and 1955 before capital punishment was eventually abolished. It was this last, unexplored period of Ruth's life that interested me most, once I started to examine the vast archive of papers relating to it. Her case was superficially well known, with the murder she committed arising from a perfect storm of what were then society's quintessential obsessions: class, politics, and gender. Through sheer grit, Ruth had escaped an impoverished background and single motherhood as a teenager to become the youngest manager of any London nightclub. Then divorced with a second child, she had a close circle of female friends, a good income, and a swanky flat above the little club in Knightsbridge, whose members included Hollywood actors, politicians, and royals. Ruth was never short of admirers, but she fell catastrophically in love with Playboy racing driver David Blakey, 3 years her junior. Despite his own inability to be satisfied with one woman, as Ruth phrased it, Blakey was fanatically jealous of her. They could be as bad as each other. Ruth slept with her most ardent admirer, Desmond Cusson, in retaliation for David breaking his promise to take her to Paris one weekend. Their love triangle lasted many months, with more than a touch of Shakespearean tragedy to it. But at its dark, twisted heart lay David's physical and emotional abuse of Ruth, which culminated in her losing everything: her home, her job, and, most devastating of all, the child she would have borne him. Cusson's full role in what played out next remains open to debate, but certainly he gave Ruth his old service revolver and taught her how to use it. He also drove her to leafy Hampstead on Easter Sunday 1955 in search of Blakey, who had been partying with friends. They trailed him to the Magdala Tavern, where Cusson sped off, leaving Ruth pacing the road. When Blakey emerged from the pub with a friend, she shot him at point-blank range, watched by several horrified bystanders, one of whom was injured by a stray bullet. "You'll both die now," shouted Blakey's distraught pal as an off-duty policeman removed the gun from Ruth's unresisting hand. He was right. David Blakey died in the ambulance on the way to hospital, while Ruth was executed 3 months later, after a trial lasting just 2 days, on July 13, 1955.